All right, so I am on the road right now, so I don't have all of my fancy AV equipment, and hopefully you won't hear the dog barking in the background. There's a couple dogs in the house. With that said, I'd like to get started. First off, a lot of this stuff that I'm showing you right now is sort of pre-course materials that I'm developing for a new iPhone course that's going to teach Swift development, and it's going to teach it in terms of how to make an iPhone app from scratch. Then there's a second course that's going to teach you how to create an iPhone game. So this summer I was in Athens, Greece, where I taught a 2-week workshop to high school students. So I guess that was 7th through 8th grade. And I'll be creating a course based on the materials that I created for that course. So hopefully everyone can hear me right now. Just pipe up in the chat because I have unmuted my mic. And the third course that I'm going to be doing is, so there's 3 courses in this bundle. The third course is going to be following me through the app development of an idea that the backers on the Kickstarter project are going to help sort of direct, and that's to showcase how to do web services, database connections, and stuff like that within an iPhone app. So those are the courses that this material is sort of related on, and basically the way I want to do it this time around instead of last year is make it so that these courses are more interactive. So these are, the first 2 courses are a daily format, and I'm going to be getting direct feedback from students on what's working or what's not working to make it easier to follow along. So that's the gist of these new courses. And to get started, I want to take you through the development of a new iPhone app using Swift and the new Xcode 6. Right now I have the Xcode 6 Beta 6, but it looks like Beta 7 came out today, though my internet's not fast enough to download that whole thing right now, so I didn't go ahead and grab it. But you can go ahead and get it. It's got some bug fixes and things like that. So that's good to do, and I can show you how to find that if I just turn on my screen. So there's 2 places to get Xcode right now, and they're going to be a little bit different sort of moving forward. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to learn about Swift. So if you just Google Swift, and you could do Swift blog. If you just do this in Google and type Swift blog, the first thing you should see is developer.apple.com/swift/blog. If you go ahead and click on that right here, this is the Swift website, and what you're going to want to look at here are the resources right in here. So if we click on this, this will allow you to download Xcode 6 Beta 7 right here. There's some release notes. There's a bunch of videos here. These videos right here are pretty good. They are showing you some stuff that has changed since then, so what you might be seeing in some of those videos has potentially changed. If we look at the Swift programming language, that's this link right here. This one we can see a little bit about Swift, and what's important here I would look at if you're trying to figure out what changed is the revision history. This will show you what changed over the course of time, so you can scroll through here and see all the different changes. These are all changes to the new programming language that Swift has. All right, so that is sort of getting started with Swift, and what you want to do here, if we just go back to the main page, up at the top you can hit the download link right here. So if you just click on this, it'll start to download. I probably want to stop that because I don't have a ton of bandwidth here, and you can grab that new copy. So let me just stop that. But it's 2.46 gigabytes, so once you get it, you can install it, and that can stand side by side right now with the current version of Xcode 5. The other method for getting it is going to the Mac App Store. So if I switch over, this will change when it's released. So let's switch screens. All right, so you should see the App Store here. all you need to do is go to the top bar up here and type in Xcode, and you'll find Xcode. So when iOS 8 ships, you'll be able to find it right here. And if you just click on this, you can install it, and this will download it. The same thing, except this is going to give you the current version that you can submit apps with. And so the current version that you can submit apps to the store right now is Xcode 5.1.1. And right now you can't publish an app with Xcode 6, but that will be changing once they release the Grandmaster. You'll be able to submit an iPhone app with that, and I'm expecting that to happen in the next couple of weeks. So without further ado, let's jump into creating an app from scratch. I want to do something that's going to be just a simple little demonstration of how to lay out an app, how to work with Xcode. And so we're going to jump right into Xcode right now. I'm going to show you what it's going to look like so that you can get an idea of what we're building, and then we'll go ahead and start it from scratch. So there's a bunch of source code files here, and then we've got our storyboard file, which is our interface file. And I'm just going to hit the play button, which is up top here, so you should see my mouse. If I click right here, you can see the app started, and let me switch to that. So I'm going to have to juggle the screen every time I want to show you the iPhone app. So let's switch over. Now you should see the simulator. The iPhone simulator is our virtual way of interacting with an iPhone app. And what I'm going to do in here, I'm not sure if my mouse is showing up over the simulator. So one of the things you'll notice here is if I click on one of the text boxes, you can see the keyboard slide up. Now, if you're trying to follow along or you're watching this video later, when you first run the new version of Xcode, you might not see the keyboard appear. And if that is the case, you're going to want to go to the menu bar, go to Hardware, and then look for Keyboard, and it's the toggle software keyboard. So this is something different from Xcode 5. And if you just do Command K, that'll make the keyboard either hide or disappear. Now this is mimicking the behavior when you have a Bluetooth keyboard attached to your iPhone or your iPad. And when you do that, the keyboard actually disappears since your physical keyboard is going to take control. So what this app will do right now is if I press this button, how many days old, that's this blue text here, if I click on that, and then let go, it's going to tell me how old I am. So if I was born on January 1st of 1900, that's going to be the age that I am in days. And so that's what we're going to build, and we're going to do this using Swift. The code that you're going to see here is very similar to what we would do in Objective-C. It just looks a little bit different, but all the API calls are going to be very similar. So if you know how to do this in Objective-C, it's a pretty straightforward transition to Swift. You just have to sort of, I would call it, massage the code a little bit so that it works. There are a couple things that have changed. One of the notable things about Swift is this concept of an optional. So what we had in C++ and Objective-C and C, we have these pointer objects. And with pointers, you could have a nil pointer. Now that's a little bit different in Swift. We don't have nil pointers in the same way. We have a concept of nil, which means nothing, but it's not a pointer anymore. So it's not like a memory address. It just means the absence of any kind of item. And it's no longer just restricted to objects. It also applies to any kind of data type like an int or an enum or anything like that. So the whole concept of optionals in Swift is going to be based on if you can parse something. So the quick example right here, if I type something like ABC in the day text field, that is something that we can't turn into a number. ABC doesn't correlate to a number in the way we're using the application right now. So that would be something that would cause our app to crash when I say how many days old. So if I click this, all of a sudden the app has crashed. So you'll notice that the blue button is now sort of faded out. That's because it's still in the press state. And then if I jump back to Xcode, what you're seeing, we can switch screens. All right, so now we're back in Xcode, and you can see that we've stopped the application. We have a thread 1 that has stopped, and in the very center we're seeing thread 1 exec bad instruction. And so this is because we're working with an optional value, and the optional value here comes from the toInt method. So we'll get more into this, but this is sort of a thing that's going to be different with Swift. And right now I'm not doing any kind of data validation to make sure that these aren't words or text like that. So when you do type in something wrong, it's going to crash the app. So that's the app right now. It can work for everything as long as it's a number. When we're working with iPhone apps, I find it easiest to get the most basic thing running. And so adding a lot of error detection logic is useful to know, but from a beginning standpoint, I don't want to do that. And building this app is more than just the Swift code. So we're going to go through the entire process of designing the user interface, and then we're going to work with dates a little bit, and then we'll connect our user interface to code, and then we'll update the way it displays using some number formatters to make it look a little bit more presentable to a user and sort of build off of that. So if you have any other questions, we'll take those at the end. I'm planning to have this wrap up by around 7:30 or 7:45. So hopefully it doesn't go that long to get the app working. So let's go ahead and start a new Xcode project. Now, this might be a little bit hard. I'm going to share my whole screen, which might look a little bit funky, but I'm going to do that so you can see the creation of a new project. It's going to be hard to read, though, because my screen resolution is bigger. So if I grab my desktop, all right, so this is the Xcode project. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the top corner. So you might see my mouse up top. We're going to go File, New, Project. In here, the thing that I always start with is iOS application. So click on this, and then single view application right here. So if you click on that and hit next, you can create a new project. So we'll just call this Days App. And you're going to select Swift right here. So the drop down allows you to switch between Swift and Objective-C. They finally made this more user-friendly. Before it used to be Foundation, and that didn't mean Objective-C to most people. So now it's a lot easier. It's Swift or it's Objective-C. So it's very clear when you're creating a new iPhone app. We're going to stick to iPhone. So when you first run it, it might be set to universal, and then we'll hit next. All the other values, you can just type whatever you want. Your organization name, the organization identifier, those can be whatever you want. They just need to be unique. So put your name there, put your name as a web address. That's a recommended Apple approach, and then we'll get started with that. I'll just create this, and I put it in a folder on my desktop called Projects. For me, that's easiest because I create a lot of projects. So one of the things you have to understand is when you're making apps, it's a really good idea just to make a bunch of them. So now I'm going to switch over to just looking at our app screen with Xcode here. So let me just switch screens. It's going to look a little funky with this screen within a screen. And okay, so I've got the Days app, so you should see this now. The first thing that you're going to see are 3 panels with a toolbar along the top. The leftmost panel over here, this is going to be your project navigator, and actually this icon, if you're looking where my mouse is in the top left corner, the project navigator is the most important and most used tab that you'll be using here. There are other tabs here, like if you're searching for a certain file in your program, that's probably the next most useful over here. So switch to this file folder icon, and then since we're selected on the project here, what we're going to see in the center here, this is our sort of text area or our content area where we'll see stuff. And in here we'll see project settings. So this is where you can set the rotation of the device that's supported, the status bar style, the app icon, any additional libraries that you might want to include from third-party open source software, or maybe something that another developer at your company has made. So those are Good to know. Now, the new thing with Swift is we're going to see the .swift extension instead of the .m or the .mm or the .h files. And these are the code files that we'll have in our application. They are pretty similar. The app delegate is going to be when your app is starting or stopping, when it's pausing because it's going into the background because you've received a phone call. There's some hooks in here that can help you with that. I'm not going to worry about this right now. We're going to do all of our work in the viewcontroller.swift file, which is basically your first screen of the iPhone app. So that's what we were looking at on the simulator. And if you remember, the simulator I showed you doesn't have a border, so it doesn't really look like an iPhone anymore, and I'm not sure if that's a change with Xcode 6. It looks like they got rid of the skin, so it doesn't look like an iPhone. It's just the screen, so that might be a little bit confusing or different coming from Xcode 5 if you had the screen showing up. So what we have here is the viewDidLoad method. The viewDidLoad method is going to be the very first method that we really care about when we're first getting started with an iPhone app. This is where you can add some code here. So what I can do right now is just print a message. So I can just print ln, that means print line, and with that I can just say hi app Rochester. So this is a little bit different than what we've seen with Objective-C. In Objective-C you had a method called nslog, and it looks something like this, and you had a semicolon. So the new things that I want to highlight with Swift are there is no semicolon that you need here. Now you can put a semicolon, it's not going to be an issue, but you don't need it anymore. And the other thing you'll notice is that there's no @ symbol. So in Objective-C we had a lot of @ symbols, and that's not something that we see a lot of in Swift. So what I like about Swift is that we've reduced the number of special characters that you have to type, which is going to reduce the number of errors that you have when you forget to add something specific. So I think that's a really good benefit for it. And the other thing you see here is it's print ln. So ln means that there's going to be a new line. So let's go ahead and run this. I'll hit the start button. And I'm going to tap, actually no, I don't have to do anything. This is in the viewDidLoad. So when the view first appears, now you can't see the screen right now, but it's currently a blank canvas, so it's a blank iPhone app. And the one thing that you can see down here is the message that printed out. Now if I were to print this out twice, so I can copy this line and paste it, when we run it again, you're going to see that they're going to be on separate lines down here. So this is our console output. The console is our sort of view into what's happening as a developer with our iPhone app. And this is a great place when you're trying to debug something or fix a crash to figure out what's going on. Now, I'm using print ln, but what we can do here is I can change the first one to just print. And this will still output, but it won't give us a new line so that it's going to be all on one line. So you can see the difference here. So print ln is a nice way to output stuff when you're not sure what's going on and you don't want to hook up a user interface. But we're going to hook up a user interface, so we're going to be able to see what's going on visually, and I think that's a really important thing. So that's a little bit about Swift, and there's other differences here. So if you remember from Objective-C, like all of our special keywords had the @ symbols in front, and class right now no longer has that, so it's a little bit easier to write, easier to read. You are seeing something that's called override. This I've seen in C# and other languages. This is basically saying this is another method that someone else says that we need to conform to, so we're going to override it and replace its functionality. This is just more explicit. This will help prevent certain issues that we had with Objective-C. So this is a good change. It's making it more explicit as to what you are doing. And then the other thing to keep in mind is if you've never coded before, we're looking at these curly braces. Curly braces essentially allow us to block up chunks of code. So in here, this is one method. A method is just a function that is owned by an object or a current instance of an object. And right now we have two methods. So it did receive memory warning. This second method down here, this is called when you run out of memory. And this can happen when you're doing a lot of video editing or image editing or pulling in a lot of data from a website. Then the top level we have our class that's going to contain everything. So the syntax is a little bit different, but you can just think of it as blocks of code and then you can have inner blocks of code for your methods. I wouldn't keep print statements in your code that's going to be production. Generally, you want to either comment them out, or you can disable them by using a different type of output function that only prints out debug stuff to developer devices, and then when you go to the App Store, you can print out the other stuff. But when you're just getting started, I wouldn't worry about having the optimal setup. You just want to get writing code. You just want to be experimenting with things and getting going. Okay, so let's jump into our storyboard. This has changed, and actually this is going to be hard to show on such a small screen, so I might need to make this a little bit bigger. Let me know if you can still read that. I just increased the screen size. So one of the new things with iOS and what we have here is this new canvas that's got these any dimensions, and I don't really like this change from a beginner standpoint because it's adding more work to a beginner. So what I'm going to show you is how I work around this new setup. Right now you're looking at what could be an iPhone screen or it could be an iPad screen. Apple's made it so that you can have just sort of one interface file for both. I find it a little hard to visualize right now. They've got this UI down here that lets you select what configuration. So if I wanted to do an iPhone, down here you'll see that there are some tooltips for what's going on. If you want an iPhone, it's going to be something like this, but this isn't the correct iPhone size. If I switch over here and I'm on the sidebar, so the utilities panel, with the size inspector, you'll see that the size of this view controller, if I click on it, is 400 by 600. Now, I don't think that's going to be the new size of the iPhone, but this is the size that it could be in like a pop-up on an iPad or something like that. So this could just be a widget that you have on your iPad. This is a little confusing for me just starting out. So what I'm going to show you is if you click on this file inspector on the utility panel here, you can turn off size classes. I find that this is a lot easier to follow, and it looks like my pop-up is not showing up. Real quick, I'm going to switch to full screen mode. All right, so here's Xcode right now. And I hit that checkbox that's right down here on the right, in the middle of that panel. And here I just want to make this just for iPhone. I'm going to disable size classes. They make it look really scary. Just do this. It'll be a lot easier. This looks like the dimensions for an iPhone 5. So this makes more sense to me. Plus, when you drag out stuff onto here, it's going to be where you want it. Versus the other approach, the controls are not going to be centered unless you add auto layout. And that's another thing to learn, and it takes time. So just to get started, we're going to keep it real simple. We're going to do drag and drop and get it working. Now, what we're going to do here is we're going to look at this tab way down here. And let me switch back to just the Xcode view so that you can read everything that's going on. Alright, so you should be looking at the same project. So this is the day app. And down here in the bottom right corner, you might not see this tab if you accidentally drag down. So just make sure that you either click this down here. If you click this little circle with a square in it, that's the object library. That'll make this pop up. You can drag this up to read the different things here. Now this is the list view. This is helpful when you're just starting out. Once you know what all this stuff is, it's a lot easier if you can just switch to the grid view. So you can drag out text fields from here, you can drag out sliders. If you don't like something, you can always undo. So if I do Command Z, that'll undo the placement. Or we can put it back. You can select it and then hit the delete key and it will disappear from your interface. Another method is to drag it off the screen. So if you drag it out of the Xcode project, it will disappear and be removed for you. So we're going to need some text fields for this user interface. So we'll go ahead, drag some of them out, and we can align them to center. So if I select them all just by holding the Shift key and selecting, or I can do the drag here, then I can get multiple all in one go. All right, hold on a second. All right, so if I select all of these, you have to do it within the canvas, otherwise it doesn't select. I probably should submit a bug report because that's a little annoying. Another cool thing is if you select multiple things or just one thing, you can hold the Option key and then you can drag down. Also, holding the Option key while you have one of these, I'm not sure if this is new, I don't think it is. If you hold the Option key and you hover over different things, you can see how many pixels or points that are away. So these are going to be points because we're dealing with Retina screens. So our recommended distance here is 8 points between these text boxes or text fields. So let's go ahead and drag out some labels. And what you're going to do here is once you drag it out, it's going to be a left click and you just drag out. You can double click on this and you can rename this to day, and then I can duplicate this by holding the Option key, clicking on it, and then letting go, and then letting go of Option. So you want to keep Option down, otherwise it won't duplicate and you'll just drag the original item. And then we can duplicate it again to create that. So now we can write month, and then we can do year here. If you want a label for the top, you can just drag one out and sort of center it, and then we'll just call this Days App. Now I want this to be bold, and I'm going to rearrange stuff. So I'm going to rearrange it so this is at the top. Then I'm going to select all of these by highlighting, and I'm going to drag these down a little bit so that they're the recommended distance away from the top. So if I'm holding the Option key, I can see that that's 8 points away. And the next thing I want to do is bold this or increase the font size. So we have our object library, and we're still in the list view right here, so I can switch to the grid view so that we can see more things just by pressing this button right down here. So the button on the very bottom sort of left of this panel will allow us to do that. That just makes it easier to see all the different widgets that we can drag out, and I can undo that as well. So let's go back to this text here. I find that text formatting on iOS apps is a lot easier than what I've experienced with Windows app development or with Eclipse, and that may have changed. Last time I tried Android was probably 2012 when I was teaching at RIT. So I've used all the other dev tools. I still think that Xcode is the easiest to get started with. There's the least amount of controls, and the controls for me make more sense than they do on other platforms. That's just a little aside here. Now with the font here, we can select the font right in this panel, and I can switch this, and I'm not sure, I don't think you see the pop-up. So there's a little pop-up when I click on that little T symbol here. So if I click on that, I can switch this to a bold font, and you'll see that it goes bold. Now, one of the issues, if we're looking at the center here, is now we have the ellipses and we have these dot, 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 and that's no good for us. And if I increase the font size further on the right, so if I hit that up arrow to maybe 30, you're going to see that less of our text is showing. Now here along the top menu bar, if you go to, and you won't be able to see this since I don't have the menu bar in the shot, but if you go to the editor tab along the top, there's a size to fit content. And the shortcut key for that is Apple equals. And this is a really easy one to remember because a lot of times when you're resizing things, you want them to be the best fit. So if you do Command equals, that will resize it. And now what you'll have to do is you have to relay it out. So you have to put it in the position you want. So we center along the top. Now that's going to be overlapping with our other things. So I'm going to drag those down a little bit. And there we go. So those are our text fields for input. The next thing we need is a button. And I'm going to drag one out. And we'll place it right down here. And we'll just do calculate. Let's do calculate age in days. Okay, so that's going to move it around. So once you finalize the text you want, you'll want to recenter it because Xcode does make that jump around. I wish it would stay in place, but it doesn't. It probably only stays in place if you actually add layout constraints, but that's a lot more work than what we care about right now. So now we've got a basic interface. Let's just go ahead and hit the run button up top. So in the top left corner, hit the play button. That's going to start the app up. And let me just switch over to it so that you can see that the app is working. So here is the app screen, and if I click on one of these text fields, you're not seeing the keyboard appear. So to make the keyboard appear, I'm going to do Command K, which is going to cycle the software keyboard. And then in the bottom corner, we can switch to numbers, and we can just start typing in some values here. Now, to make it a little bit more user-friendly, we'd want to make sure that our keypad here started with numbers rather than letters, since letters would result in a runtime error with our basic demo that we're doing. If I tap this button, you'll see that it clicks, nothing's happening in the interface yet because we haven't hooked that up, and then we have our label. So let's jump back to our Xcode window. And in here, the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to switch this label so that it takes up the full screen. So if we resize this, now this I want to show you, this is an issue that I needed to submit a bug report to Apple, and this is related to auto layout. Sometimes when you're resizing something, it moves the window around, which can be a little bit weird. The best approach, the workaround that I have, is to place your label on the left side where you want it, especially if you're going to just match up to this edge here. And then if you resize from the right, you won't get that wonky behavior where your whole view screen is moving around. So that's a little weird. In the tab over here, we can switch to the centered alignment, and so now our label is here, and this is going to be our message label. So I can just write message here. Now if you were to click this and do commands equals, it's going to shrink it down, and that's not what we want because we don't want the text to clip here. So we want a full line of text that's going to display right here, and we'll just leave it as is. So now what we've done is we've created the entire user interface that we're going to need. Our next step is to connect this to code, and then we can start working with the date logic with the Apple APIs that make it really easy to work with date and time. If you have any other questions, just post them in the chat channel. The link for posting questions is in the bottom of the YouTube video if you're watching it live. Just go to the info and you should see a link to the chat. Okay, so the next step is we're going to switch our view. So the next part of the interface that's really important to understand are the panels that you can turn on and off. And these panels are great if you have a limited amount of space in your computer. So if you're working on a smaller laptop, these panels can show and hide the different tabs, and they basically correlate to the picture that you see as the icon. All right, so if we just click on these, we can switch over to our project navigator. And what we're going to do now is switch to the assistant editor, and that's the tuxedo icon right here. So if you click on this, that will allow us to see two code files or two files at the same time. So in this case, we're going to see the interface file along with our code file. And what we're going to do here is create outlets and actions. So outlets are our way of controlling a user interface element, like a button, a label, or a text field. And then our actions are our way to respond to events based on the user. So a button press, when someone taps on a button with their finger, that's going to result in an action. And what we want to happen with an action is that a block of code is going to run. So we might do some logic, we might grab some data from a database, or in this case, we're going to figure out how many days old someone is based on their birthday. So if they type in their birthday, they'll be able to see that, and so that's the code that we're going to trigger from the user interface. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to connect is this button here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, and I'm not sure, let me just double check if this is going to show up. Okay, so you can't see the line that I'm drawing. there is a, I'm going to switch to the other view so that you can see this. All right, so we have Xcode up front. I'm going to right click and drag, and so you should see this line that I'm dragging. So what I did is I did a right click and I'm dragging over. Now if I hit escape, that's going to cancel that. Another option is if you're on a trackpad, so if you're on a MacBook or a MacBook Air, you can two-finger click with your fingers and then you can drag around. You can drag with both fingers, or you can let go with one of your fingers while the index finger or your middle finger is still down, and you can drag with your other finger. So that's my favorite way to connect if I'm on a trackpad. I find it easier to do with a real mouse. So it's up to you how you want to do it and what kind of computer you're working with if you have a mouse plugged in. But if you just let go here, we can create an outlet or an action. Now the default one that we're going to see here is going to be an outlet. For a button, you generally want an action unless you want to change the title of the button after someone presses it. So here we're going to say the calculate button was pressed, and I'll call it the calculate age button. So I like to have a descriptive name here. This text is probably really small for you. This is using camel case, so when I hit connect, you should see a bigger version of that. Camel case just means you have a lowercase first letter, and then every other letter after that is going to be a capital letter. And this is just a convention for doing function or method names as well as variable names. Okay, so now we have this here, and we can put a print statement in here. So if I just type print line, so print ln, we can say calculate pressed, and that is going to be double quotes surrounding the string. So the text string that we want to print out is inside of our parentheses. So this is basically just like a function call that you have in C# or C++, something like that, where you're using the parentheses for your variables that you're passing in. Now this is a different way of writing it than what we saw with Objective-C. If you've experienced that at all, Objective-C has lots of square brackets, and a lot of people don't like Objective-C because of that. So if you're interested in getting into iPhone apps and that was a big turnoff, I think the new way of writing a method is a lot nicer. All right, so now we've connected that. Let's go ahead and run the app. And I'm going to click the button, so you should still see it here since I'm still in the full screen view. And when I click this button, you're going to see the output down here. So every time I press the calculate button on our simulator, it's going to print out again. So we pressed it 3 times, we see it 3 times down here. So that is our action that we can then do logic in, and so we're going to add logic there. But before we can do any logic, we need to get user input from our individual who's downloaded our app, and they want to calculate how many days old they are. And so in order to do that, we're going to have to set up outlets for our text fields as well as our message output label. So what I'm going to do here is just right-click and drag, and I like to put these right underneath the class definition, so around line 12 or 13, and this is the day text field. Go ahead and connect these, and then I'll switch back to just the Xcode view so that it's easier to read the code. So getting these in here, sometimes it might be helpful. I don't want to reconnect it to another one. So if you're having trouble finding the space, you can just add a couple of new lines in here and then retry, right-click and drag from the month text field until you can insert an outlet, and this will be our month text field. Now, I'm doing a very descriptive name because this helps me understand what the object is, makes it a whole lot easier to work with things, and then we have our year text field. You're not confused as to what the object is. If I just said day here, we wouldn't know, okay, is that a text field or is that the actual number of days? And for me, day would mean number of days. So I want to just make sure that when I create a name, it's very descriptive as to what the object is or what the element is. And so these are our user interface elements, and that will help with that. The last thing we need to connect is our message, and that will be one more outlet. So we'll just insert that down here. and we'll just call this message label. And the reason I'm using label here is because right in here it's the UI label. So for most user interface elements, you'll see what the name is based on its type. That's part of the name I use when I'm connecting it to code. Let me know if you have any questions about doing these connections. I'm just sort of walking through this. So if we hide our left panel and we rearrange stuff a little bit, okay, so that's all the outlets. So we have 4 outlets here, and you can choose to format them however you want. Let me just go over one of these lines so that you sort of have an idea of what they are. The first thing that you're seeing here is @IB outlet. Now I did talk about there's less special variables. This is one unique one that you generally do not have to write. This is auto-inserted for you. So all 4 lines here, as well as our action down here, were auto-generated in Xcode. So let's switch back to just the Xcode window so that you can see what we're working with. All right, so now we're back in just Xcode. So we're looking at these 4 lines up top. If we just sort of decompose this real quick to give you an understanding of how this works, IB outlet just allows Xcode to know that this thing is connected to something in the interface. And if we hover over one of these things, it should highlight, and I think you can see that. It should, yes, it's highlighting the user interface element that is connected to that line of code. So this is how you can see the relationship, and you can see the same thing with our button down here. The other thing you can do is you can right-click in here, and you can see that touch up inside, which is the action that happens when a user taps a button and lifts their finger up, is connected to the calculate age button pressed. And so that's our method right here. The next thing up top that we see is this week. And this is just a object ownership thing. Don't worry too much about it. Var is how we declare variables in Swift. So you're going to see var a lot. And then you're going to see the name of the variable. So day text field is what I called it, followed by a colon. Now, this part is optional when you're creating your own variables. Xcode will automatically insert this just to make it easier to read your code here. So when you see a colon here, it's going to tell you what type it is. Now in Swift, one of the differences from this from Objective-C is you don't actually have to type the variable anymore. So right here we have the UI text field, but that's an optional thing that we don't necessarily have to do when we're creating our own variables. If I wanted to, down here, I could say var x is equal to 10. I don't have to tell it an int anymore. Xcode will automatically figure out what that is, and I could do something like var name is equal to Paul. And Xcode is going to know exactly what type it is because it has automatic type inferencing that can just do that for you. So it's a bit magical. It's helpful, I think, because it reduces some of the sort of knowledge you needed before to get started and makes it easier to just start making an app without having to think about all the little details. So now that we have this working, I'm going to go ahead. I guess I'll leave that there. I'll share this project so that you can mess around with it later after the talk. So when the calculate button is pressed, this is where we start to do all the fun stuff. I'm going to switch to our single view. So let's stop this, and then up top along here you'll see this little standard editor. If you just click that, that'll switch back to one view, and then I'm going to want the project navigator back so I can jump back to the view controller code file. All right, so we're ready to really dive into Swift here, and we're going to be using the date classes. So if we want to create a date, the common thing that we think about dates are in terms of days, months, and years. And so in order to tell that to the iPhone, we're going to have to use a special class called the NSDate components. Now all of these classes exist in both Objective-C and Swift, and the way you use them is pretty much the same. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a new variable. So like I created the variable x up top, we're going to create a variable and we're going to call it date components. So again, I'm trying to be specific about my variable names, and here we're using the equal sign. The equal sign that we're seeing here is the assignment operator. So you can think of an equal sign in Swift as an arrow that's going to point from the right side to the left side. So whatever's on the right side is going to be stored in the left side. You want to think of a variable as a sticky note. So date components is a sticky note that we're going to give to the computer. This is going to be our way of telling the computer what our birthday is. So we start typing ns date components. I'm not sure if autocomplete is showing. I don't think it is. Okay, so you can see what it wants to, but you don't see the drop down. So there's a drop down that's appearing on my screen. It's okay. We'll just run without that, just so that you can focus on the code that I'm writing. So the first thing that we're going to want to do here is just create a date component that we can work with. So I'll create a date components.day and set it to my birthday. So I was born April 9th, so the 9th is the day, and then date components.month is equal to 4, that's April, and then date components.year will go 1986. So that's my birthday, and what I can do here is we can print this out. And I don't need the semicolon, so if we go ahead and run this right now, I'm just going to hit the button on the iPhone app that's going to trigger this code, and you see the date components object pops up down here. Now if you want to read this all on one line, you can hit this button on the bottom right corner. That's going to make this slide in and out. So the thing that I'm hiding right now is the variable view. Right now we're not debugging the app, so we don't really need it. We just want the console, which is our text output. So here we can see all of our output, and we've printed out the date here. Now I want a date object because I can do math calculations with the date objects and the calendar, and so we're going to need a couple new variables here. We're going to need a calendar. Working with dates is actually pretty complex, and it's actually helpful because Apple wrote all this code that can do all of the logic for you that takes into account leap years, leap days, changes in the calendar formats at certain times, and stuff like that. So that's a lot of things. There's a lot of special edge cases that you have to worry about, and this class will take care of that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to create a calendar using the identifier, and the identifier here we're using is the NS Gregorian calendar. So this is our standard calendar that you're used to, unless you're not on a standard calendar, then I don't know what your calendar would be. Maybe you're on the Mayan calendar. So here we'll have the birthday or birth date. This is going to be a date object, and we're going to use a method on the calendar. So calendar is an object that we just create an instance of. We use the dot syntax, much like we did with the date components. When you do calendar dot, you can invoke a method or you can get access to a property. And here we can use the method called date from components, and here you pass in an ns date components object, and I'll pull up the documentation so that you can see what this is in a second. So what I'm going to type here is date components, and that's going to pass that in. And now if I hold the option key, I'm going to click on this. It's going to do a little pop-up. Now the pop-up isn't showing right now, but I should be able to get the documentation to pop up. And actually, I'll just switch to the full screen view just to show you how this is going to work. All right, so you haven't been able to see much autocomplete because screen sharing with Google Hangouts sort of limits that when I select a specific screen. What I can do here is if I hold the option key, you'll see a question mark appear over my mouse, and I click on this. It's going to give us a nice little pop-up that's going to explain how to use this, and There's documentation reference down here for the class. If I click on that, there's a lot to read here. On the left bar, you can see stuff. That's this little icon right here. It's going to be pretty small on your screen. So let's go back to Xcode. The date components is going to give us a NSDate object. And right at the very top, you're going to see this dash and then an angle bracket. So that's saying it's returning an NSDate object, but it's actually returning an NSDate optional. So we talked about optionals before. There's the potential that the date that's returned is not going to be a valid date, so it will be a nil date. And so that's where optionals come in with Swift, is we don't know if it's going to be a valid date or not. So this could be an optional date. And when we use the date, we're going to have to unwrap it to see what the actual date is. And that will be something we see in one of the next lines. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to grab the current date. So I'll just create a variable called current date and set that equal to nsdate.date. This now autocomplete doesn't always work for me, so you can see some of the stuff here. It doesn't always show up, but what this will do is this will give me a date with today, the current time, and everything. So that's going to be the most accurate way to get the current time. And once we have that, we can now create another date components object. And this is going to be using another calendar method that's going to allow us to do the difference. So it's basically going to return a date component with the difference in the time between two different dates. So now we have two dates to work with. We have the current date and the birth date. And we'll create a new date components. This is going to be our day representation of the calendar. So if I do calendar.components, and I'm going to keep it in this view so you can see some of the autocomplete. I'm not sure how readable this is, so if you let me know if this looks good or if this is really hard to follow along, that would be helpful. Now we have 4 different options here, and I'm going to select the from date to date. So that's the second one here. It takes 4 parameters. If I press enter, that'll autocomplete it. Now the first thing that we have here are unit flags. This is for an NS calendar unit. This is one thing that has changed a little bit from Objective-C to Swift, but it's still the same concept. These are a special variable type. It's an enum, and you can merge multiple ones together. For the first example, we are just going to, I don't know if I'll go into more examples. We're just going to do this for a day. So what this line of code allows us to do is to calculate how many days between two different dates. And so what we specify here is that we only want to know about how many days. So we do calendar unit day. Now, as you can see in that drop down, there were other options like unit second, unit year, unit month, a whole bunch of different things. So we're just going to do day, and we'll start with that. Our from date is going to be our birth date. So we type that, then we hit tab to go to the next one. Our to date is going to be our current date. And then our options, in Objective-C you would write 0, but that doesn't work in Swift. So we've got a couple errors that we need to fix here. And let's just jump back to the code view so that you can see this, since we don't need much of the autocomplete. So I'll switch back to the code so it's full screen. And we've got 2 issues here. So if you're looking at this sidebar, this is showing you that there's an issue here. If we click on this, we have extra argument to date in call. Now, this error message will send you down the wrong path. This is not the correct issue, and that's one of the things that can be challenging when you're getting started working with code, is that it will send you down the wrong sort of rabbit hole in terms of trying to figure out what the issue is. The real issue here is that this object components takes validates, and we're passing in an optional value, and so we need to unwrap the optional value. And this is a new thing with Swift that makes it look a little bit foreign if you've never seen it before, which you haven't, and that's where you have to do exclamation mark at the end of the line for that variable. That's going to unwrap it so that we can work with it. So that fixes one of our issues. The next thing is we're seeing, and actually it looks like it's giving us this issue first, it says extra argument to date. Now, the trick here to figuring out what the problem is to look at toDate and think, okay, well, toDate doesn't look wrong. Let me look at the next thing, because the next thing is where the issue is. So anytime you see something where it says extra argument and it's one of the parameters, always look for the second one, because that's probably where the error is. And so in this case, the options here is going to be nil, not 0. And so this is the one difference. If you're looking at Objective-C code, you need to do nil instead of 0. Okay, so we're almost there. These, I guess, 4 lines of code that we've just written are going to allow us to do this day calculation. So now we can get the day. So let's create a variable for the day number, or whatever you want to call it. Let's call it days alive. I like that. So days alive is going to equal some value. And so we can get this value using our day component. So if we say day components dot day, this should give us a value, and then we can print this out to the screen. So we'll do print line days alive. And now I want to show you something that's new with Swift. So now we have this thing called, I think, string interpolation. And basically this makes it a whole lot easier to read your output, because it's all in line rather than being at the end of the line. So in Objective-C you would have to do comma and then all the variables at the end. With Swift you don't. Now there is a syntax error on this line, and that's because autocomplete actually added an extra quotation mark here, so I'm just going to delete that. There's a bug here. I need to submit a bug report on this, where if you have a variable at the very end, it adds an extra quotation mark. So that's what it should look like if we go ahead and run this, and then I click the button. So you're not going to see the iPhone app. I'm just going to click it. You'll see that it says days alive. Now we want to get that into the user interface, and the last print statement we did was a print, so it's jumbling everything. So up top on line 44, I'm going to add an ln just to make it so that that's easier to read. Okay, so if we just run this again, you can quickly test that. I'll hit the button, and now you see that they're on separate lines. So that's just a little bit easier to read. Now this number I want to format. I want to format so that we have a comma, which is common in America. Now I know in France I think they use spaces, and then other parts of the world they use periods. So we want this to format nicely, and what we're going to need to use here is NS number formatter. But before we do that, let's throw this value into our user interface. So in order to get this into the interface, we have to turn this into a string, and it's very similar to what we wrote on the previous line, the print line on line 58. We will just say message label, and so you just type this, message label dot text is going to equal some value. So if I passed it something like 18 and we tried to run it, we'd have a failure because 18 is not a string. It needs to be text. So we need to pass in quotes, and here we can just say a number. If I want this to be a number, we do the same thing we did above. We do the backslash, then the parentheses, days alive. That's going to do the insertion for us, and then we can just end the quotation mark. And if I run this now, and hopefully if we switch screens, so now you're looking at the iPhone simulator. I'm going to press the button, and it's going to print out, this is how many days I've been alive. That's 10,373. So it's not using the user input yet, so that's something that we will have to set up in the next few minutes. But it is working, and let's get it so that it looks pretty. So what I'm going to do is in here I'm going to create a new variable. This is going to be our number formatter. And again, this is using code that Apple provides, which really makes it easy once you understand what code files to look for to do certain tasks. So a number formatter is very useful in formatting currency or formatting numbers to use group separators. So we'll use number formatter dot uses grouping separator. This is by default set to false, and we need to set this to true. So this is something that's different with Swift than Objective-C. Instead of using yes and no, you use true and false, and it's all lowercase. So if we do that, we can use this number formatter. Oh, and I'm not showing the right screen, so let's go back to the code. Got to juggle all these screens. All right, so what I just added are these two lines of code. So var number formatter is equal to ns number formatter, and then it's the open parentheses, close parentheses, and then number formatter uses grouping separator equals true. This allows us to then format a string. So the number formatter, we can give it any number and it can format it for us. So what we'll do here is we will say var day string. This is going to be our output. So days alive string. Let's call it days alive string. This is going to be equal to the number formatter dot, and now we're going to look for a method here. And the method that we're going to use is string from number. So if I just type that, then we can just pass in any number here. And the number that we want to pass in is our variable called days alive. So that's an integer that works great here, and we can output that new value. So our days alive string now is going to be a string because that's what's returned here. So on this line 64, I'm going to comment out our old code with the double forward slashes, and we're going to type in days alive string, and that will autocomplete for us. All right, so now we have this all set up. I'm going to go ahead and run it. We'll switch back to the simulator, and then we'll jump back. Actually, let's go desktop. Okay, so we're in the desktop so that we should be able to see both side by side. And what we're going to do here is we just tap calculate, and now instead of seeing the unformatted, which we see down here, this is unformatted. If we switch back to the simulator, we can see that we now have the appropriate comma. Now, I haven't tried this yet, but you should be able to change your calendar, I think, location. And so if you want to test how it worked in Europe or a different country, you should be able to change that somewhere up here with your date time preferences. I'm not sure if it's in here or if it's actually within your calendar. Last time I tried it, it didn't quite work. So maybe it's in here. If I change my region to somewhere else, like Asia or Europe, that should allow you to test out if it's going to behave differently in a different country. You can also do the same, a very similar thing on the actual iPhone app. Okay, so we've got that working now, except it's only showing my birthday. So that's not very useful. We want to have values in here. So let's go ahead, we'll fix the keyboard, and then we'll hook up the user input. So I'm going to switch to our project navigator right here, and then we're going to go to our main.storyboard, and we'll click on our text fields here. So I can select all three by holding the shift key or just trying to highlight them this way. You can shift click an object or command click an object to remove it from the selection. So we have the three text fields. I'm going to pull out the sidebar, and if we scroll down a little bit, right down on, let me highlight my mouse again, you see a keyboard type. So the default is going to have words and letters, and you're not going to have numbers and punctuation. You can do the number pad or you can do numbers and punctuation. I kind of like the look and feel of the numbers and punctuation, so I'll just go with that. So if we start it up again, we hit run. If I click on a text field, we now see that the numbers are in the top. And that's helpful for us. Now what we need to do is grab the user input. So let's go up to the top here. Instead of going with a specific date, we're going to grab the value from our interface. And then we'll just wrap it up with any questions. So if you have questions, please comment now. I've got a little bit of time for questions before I have to head out. And if I don't answer your question tonight, then you can just email me at paulsolt@iphonedev.tv. And I will post this code online in the video notes after it is finished processing. So let's switch back to just Xcode. Okay, so we should be looking at Xcode here. What I've done is I've commented out my birthday because I want to pull in the value from the text field. So those text fields we have are day text field, month text field, and year text field. So I'll just start typing day text field and just fill that out. And this has a text attribute. And what we're going to want to do here is there's a method on text to turn it into an integer. So we can do dot to int, and this allows us to do a method call. Now what you're not seeing here is the autocomplete is showing me that this is an int question mark, which means it's an optional value. That means that our text that the user entered might be ABC, which means it won't turn into a number. And so we'll have to force this to unwrap. And to do that, what I do here is I add an exclamation mark. Now, this will result in a crash. So this isn't something that you want to ship to Apple as it is right now, but this is a quick way just to see if things are working. So we're going to assume for beginner purposes that the data that's entered is going to just be numerical. The next one is we want the month text field dot text, and we're going to write very similar to the previous one, to int, and then the exclamation mark, and then we'll go ahead and grab the year text field. All right, so now we're pretty much squared away. We just need to run it and see if this works. So let me switch over to the simulator. All right, so I've got the app running. And here, what we can do is we just type a value here. So I'll just do, let's start with yesterday and see if that works. So I want to just see if things were working. So yesterday would be September 1st. So we'll type 1, and then the month is going to be 9, and our year is 2014. So I'm just using the keyboard. I can click on the buttons down here. It's easier when you're developing an app to use the keyboard. Now I'll just hit the button, calculate age and days, and it shows me 1, and that's what I expected. So what happens if we switch this to last year, 2013? It shows me what we'd expect, 1 plus whatever the day was before, since this is the day before. Now, I guess I mixed up the order of month and day, but if you're not from America, you probably see it in this format because people write dates in different ways. And so that's why some of the classes that Apple provides are nice, is because they handle all of these edge cases where different cultures and things like that represent numbers differently, they write dates differently, and so these date classes make it very convenient for working with that, and they take into account any special conditions. So if we go 2 years back, we'll see that that's a bigger number, and if we go to 2000, we'll see we have the text formatting working, so you can see our label along the bottom has a comma there that separates to make the number look more appealing. So that's a little bit working with dates, working with Swift. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and ask me any questions you have about Swift or making apps and sort of moving forward. Anything about submitting apps to the App Store for iOS 8. Got a little bit of time for questions. All right, so I'm launching new courses on iPhone app development. I've just posted the link in the chat channel if you're interested. These are 3 new courses. They're going to teach you the basics, sort of going through the process that we've gone through in this video. The goal is to really give you daily focused content so that you can work through it. So we've been doing some sort of learning research. So I've been working with a friend on creating these iPhone courses, and let me switch off of the simulator. All right, so the new courses that I'm working on are sort of a different method, I guess a different approach to teaching, and I want to explain why it's different and sort of so that you can sort of see the difference. So the big problem that I face is that I film all of these videos a lot of the time in the dark. I don't have a live audience always watching, so I don't know if I'm doing it right or if something's confusing. And what I wanted to do was provide a better structure. The thing I liked best about college courses is that you're sort of required to attend. Now, you don't always lose points if you don't attend, but you do have to go to exams, you have to turn in homework. There's some real world sort of time that you have to spend in class, and you don't get that with an online course. So what I want to do moving forward is to teach sort of this interactive semi-live format. Not all of the videos are going to be a live format, but they will be created sort of daily. Additional content will be created daily so that you can learn more effectively. So that's sort of the idea, and I'm providing sort of lessons that can be consumed in a daily format, and you can just work on one lesson a day. The idea is to have sort of 60 minutes that you can set aside to work through. So there's going to be a lecture, there's going to be a code sort of exercise that you work on, and then there'll be a Q&A video which is going to be based on any questions that I get that day. So I'll be creating new videos for this new course, and I think that's going to be an interesting way to teach, and I think it'll be good because the real issue that I have with online courses is that people don't follow through, they don't do the work, they're not learning, they're not publishing their app, and that's kind of our goal. Is we want you to go through this course and we want you to be able to publish an app. So that's the drive for the new courses. They're going to be covering Swift, which I think is a lot more approachable than Objective-C, and there's a lot of great features that Swift has that just makes it way easier to, like what we did here, get numbers into text fields. In Objective-C, you have to do a lot of sort of data wrapping, and it's really, I don't know, it's a lot more typing. So I think that's really exciting about the courses. And then the other cool thing is we'll be doing game development. Games are something that games are the reason I got into programming, and so I wanted to just sort of create some course materials out there so that someone could learn how to make an iPhone game using that. So that's sort of the motivation. The other issue I have with online courses, the reason we have structure here rather than just giving you 150 videos to watch, is that if I don't give you structure, it's really hard to know if you're making progress, if you're on track, if you're learning different things without having to be sort of pushed in that direction. So that's the new format. And the first course is going to kick off on October 6th. I'm expecting Apple to launch iOS 8 this month. So assuming that happens, we'll be going ahead and doing the course. The new iPhone will come out. I'll probably get it so I can demo it off to you guys if you're not sure if you want to upgrade or not. And then if you have any other questions, just shoot me an email at paulsolt@iphonedev.tv, or I'll be around at the other App Rochester meetings, and you'll be able to watch more probably live Q&As with me on Swift, and we can move forward that way. Looks like we have one more question from Dower, and that's, are there any bugs in auto layout right now? I don't think there's any new bugs. There are bugs with working with auto layout that in my courses, I show workarounds for. So if you're not sure how to do something, you can watch my course videos where I do explain how to work around common problems. Like the one we saw where the when I was resizing something from the left, it caused the entire window pane to sort of go the other way. That's kind of annoying when you're trying to work on stuff. So there's some small issues, but for the most part, auto layout's really good. It is a little bit more complex. And so what auto layout is, it's a way of specifying where you want user interface elements to sort of line up. So if we're looking at my screen again real quick, and I go to the main storyboard, auto layout allows you to specify that you want this thing always to be in the top. So what I can do is I can right click and drag up, and I can say, okay, I want this to always be in the top, and you'll see a little bar appear. And once you start laying out interface and you want more control, that's when you use auto layout. But when you're first getting started, you can run it without it and your app will still work just fine. So I'm just going to undo that. I'll be doing more videos on how to work with auto layout because I don't think there's really bugs with it, but there's issues that you can run into if you do it wrong. And so that's probably one of the challenges with auto layout. It is more expressive and it allows you to do some really cool stuff, but at the same time you can shoot yourself in the foot and you can get like weird formatting because you specify something wrong. So it's going to take you for your word. So you're going to tell it you want a button on the left, it's going to put it on the left, but then if you say you want the button to always be touching another element and then you move the other element to the other side, you can get some weird stretching artifacts where it's going to sort of just stretch out your button more than you would like. So those are some things that you might run into. And I think it really takes someone to walk you through the process because for me it was really frustrating to get started with. So, all right, so that's really all I have time for with questions today, but once I get back to my office in Rochester, I would like to do another Q&A session or another presentation like this. So if you found this helpful, just let me know in the comments below or send me a message at my email, and I would love to follow up with you guys. Thank you for watching, and again, just look on Kickstarter if you want to get access to my new courses. The new courses on Kickstarter are 50% off, so it's $49 a course. Once the course starts on October 6th, it'll be $100 a course or $99 a course. All right, so thank you, and I will catch you guys later.